Well, it's great to have everyone join us. So it is 1 o'clock, so we will go ahead and get started. So good afternoon and welcome everyone. We're so glad that you have joined us for our first session of WVABLE's workshop series, which is hosted by Disability Rights of West Virginia and the West Virginia Developmental Disabilities Council. For those of you that are not familiar with WVABLE, it is a savings and investment account program that allows individuals with disabilities to save and invest without jeopardizing their eligibility for public benefit programs such as supplemental security income and Medicaid. Now, today's webinar is the first in the workshop series and is titled Enrollment Walkthrough. During this workshop, we will start off with a very brief overview of the WVABLE Savings Program, followed by a step-by-step walkthrough of enrolling in a WVABLE Stable Account. We will share tips on how to make the enrollment process as smooth as possible, and we will include time for Q&A at the end. So your presenters for today's webinar will be myself, Roxanne Clay. I am with the West Virginia State Treasurer's Office and the Director of the WVABLE Savings Program, which stands for Achieving a Better Life Experience in West Virginia. And we also have Thomas Hatch. Tom is the Accounts Operations Manager for Stable Account Program. Please also welcome Roy Mallory with Disability Rights of West Virginia. He will be monitoring our chat box and will be providing technical support for our webinar today. And then before we get started, we want to mention some important reminders. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available to the public for viewing on demand. So by joining the webinar, you are automatically consenting to the recording. And if you do not wish to have your voice recorded, just please do not speak during the call. All attendee microphones have been muted to eliminate any background noise. You may include your questions in the chat box, and we will save all questions until the end of the presentation. And then closed captioning and a sign language interpreter are available for today's session. You can find and click closed captioning at the bottom of your screen. And then for the sign language interpreter, you can find the sign language interpreter's video tile, right click, and then choose pin video. For technical issues, please include a message in the chat box that's being monitored by Mr. Mallory. So during this first portion of the webinar, I'm going to provide a brief and just a very high-level overview of the WVABLE program. But let me remind you that for anyone that hasn't participated in our standard WVABLE presentation and you want to learn more about the details of the program, I highly encourage you to attend one of the reoccurring webinars. They're an hour long and we cover program information in more detail, and we offer time for Q&A during that webinar as well. I go into more detail about special considerations and benefits that are important for individuals and families to know and understand. Dates for recurring webinars are included at the WVABLE.com website. So on this slide, you will see a screenshot of WVABLE.com website. If you have an additional monitor or you have your smartphone available, feel free to take a quick look. WVABLE.com, I'll be referring to the site throughout my overview. So the website is where you can go to learn more about the information that I'm sharing with you today. This is also where you can find the link to the dates for the upcoming WVABLE webinars, and that is located right there. And this is also where you go for enrollment. This is where enrollment begins in a WVABLE account. So what is WVABLE? It is West Virginia's ABLE plan and is based on federal legislation called the ABLE Act that was passed in 2014. It's included in the Internal Revenue Code as a new section 529A. The bill created savings and investment account programs for individuals with disabilities. The money that is deposited into this account does not affect eligibility for public benefit programs such as SSI, Medicaid, SNAP, and HUD. The ABLE Act also gave states the mechanism to create their own ABLE programs. The ABLE Act does not mandate that states have a program, so we do feel fortunate to have a program in West Virginia. Our program launched in February of 2018, in which we just celebrated our 3rd anniversary early this year. So WVABLE is offered to the West Virginia resident through a partnership with the Ohio Stable Program. WVABLE accounts provide financial independence for people with disabilities. The account is owned by the individual with a disability. They provide new investment opportunities that they didn't have before. They avoid having to spend down their monies in order to stay below the $2,000 asset limit that is set by the Social Security Administration and Medicaid. Individuals can now save for an emergency fund or for the long term. For example, a lot of parents worry what will happen to their child after they pass away. So WVABLE accounts allow for the parents to start building a nest egg for their child, to pay for expenses that occur now, and to ensure that the child will be taken care of financially for the long term. So WVABLE accounts also provide tax benefits. So just like the 529 college savings plan, the interest that is earned on the investments grow tax-free, and the earnings remain tax-free as long as ABLE funds are spent on qualified disability expenses. And then new as of 2019, there is a West Virginia state income tax deduction for all contributions made to the WVABLE account by the West Virginia resident and taxpayer, and that is dollar for dollar. So who is eligible? The requirements include that the individual is a West Virginia resident, and the onset of the disability would have had to have occurred prior to the age of 26. Now keep in mind, this does not have to be the onset of the diagnosis. This would include the onset of the symptoms, which would have had to have occurred prior to age 26. Also, you do not have to actually open the account before the age of 26. And then one of the following criteria: the individual is eligible to receive SSI or SSDI due to their disability or blindness. This does not mean that you actually have to be receiving SSI. In other words, it simply means the individual has received a disability determination by the Social Security Administration. Or if they have a condition that's listed on Social Security Administration's list of compassionate allowances conditions, or through self-certification. And what that means is you have a written diagnosis by a physician of a physical or mental impairment that causes marked and severe functional limitations, and the condition has lasted or is expected to last for at least a year. So this is the same standard that Social Security uses for disability determinations. Now let's talk about enrollment real quick. How do you enroll? So while Tom will be providing a walkthrough, I just want to quickly mention a few things. Again, the enrollment is done online and it starts at WVABLE.com. At the top of the page, you'll see a tab for Open Account. That takes you to StableAccount.com. Again, that is correct because Stable, that's West Virginia's partner plan. And then the enrollment is relatively quick and easy. It takes approximately 20 minutes to complete. There is a $25 minimum deposit required to open the account. That is not a fee, that just creates your opening balance. And as far as who completes the enrollment, the Federal ABLE Act requires the person opening the account be either one, the individual with the disability or the beneficiary, or if the individual is not able to open and manage the account. So for example, it's a child, or if it's an adult with a disability who is not able or willing to enroll and manage the account, then the Act allows for what's called an Authorized Legal Representative. We refer to that person as an ALR. That is defined as either a parent, a guardian or conservator that's been approved by the courts, or an agent acting under a power of attorney. And this can be anyone that's willing to serve in this capacity on behalf of the beneficiary. Note that the power of attorney is limited to the WVABLE account. Also be advised, for the individual that acts as the authorized legal representative, they will be formally assigned to the individual's account and will be the only person allowed to transact on the account. And then let me add a very important update. So coming very soon for WVABLE, there will be additional authorized representatives who will be able to establish the WVABLE account on behalf of the beneficiary. So as per the IRS final regs that were published in November of 2020, they have expanded the list to also include a spouse, a grandparent, a sibling, or a Social Security representative payee. So be sure that you stay tuned to WVABLE.com website, our Facebook page, and of course you can look for emails from WVABLE for a formal announcement when this update is in effect. So how do you fund your account? There's several ways. Within the Stable online account platform, you can link a current checking or savings account and make transfers as needed via electronic funds transfer. We call that EFT. Or you can mail a check to Stable Program Manager that's located in Rhode Island, or through direct deposit. So this is where payroll monies can be automatically deducted and deposited into the Stable account. This can be done by the beneficiary that is working, or a parent or a family member or friend who wants to contribute a portion of their check on an ongoing basis. And we have forms to set this up at the resources tab of our WVABLE.com website. As for the investment options, so note that when a contribution is made into a Stable account, the beneficiary or the ALR will need to determine how those monies will be allocated across the investment options that are included in the plan. And also note that staff at the Treasurer's Office, we cannot provide advice on selecting your investment options. However, we do have detailed information about the investment options available on our website. From the home page, if you scroll to the bottom in the second column, you'll see savings and investments. If you click on that, it takes you to a full page with more details. And then, of course, you can seek financial advice from a financial or investment advisor of your choosing. And then, as you can see on the slide, your investment options for the WVABLE Stable account include a bank safe option. So it's just like a savings account where the earnings are very low. But it is a 100% FDIC insured option in which the principal is protected. And then you have 4 Vanguard mutual fund options that range from aggressive to conservative. And then the reminder, the benefit of a 529 account is that you do not pay taxes on the earnings portion of your investments. So you have money in your account. Now, how do you spend it? So the money in an ABLE account, they're available for use at any time to pay for qualified disability expenses. And the legislation has defined what qualifies as a disability-related expense, in that it must relate to the disability, and then it must maintain or improve the health, independence, or quality of life for the individual with a disability. So note the legislation is very broad in the interpretation of what qualifies. So there's not an actual list for the purpose that they don't want it to be restrictive. So I always like to suggest to people to think of it in terms of what would not qualify. So gifting the monies to a friend, gambling, tobacco, alcohol, for example. Now, some examples of the categories for qualified disability expense include housing and rent, education, hiring a caregiver to help with transportation, food, basic living expenses. Again, anything that benefits the child or the adult with a disability. So as for ways to make a withdrawal and get money out of your account, there's no fees and there's no limits set on making the withdrawals. So if you've linked a checking or savings account to make deposits, you can also use that same linked account to make a withdrawal by simply transferring the monies back to that linked checking or savings account. You can also make the withdrawals with a third-party check in which you request a Stable Program Manager to issue a check to a third party, to the account holder, or to the ALR, or through a Stable Visa debit card. They are a very convenient way for the individual that plans to use the monies in the account more frequently. For example, to pay for everyday living expenses. The Stable card, it does function like a loadable prepaid debit card, so the monies don't automatically pull from the Stable account. A couple notes real quick, important numbers and some special considerations to keep in mind. There is a $25 minimum deposit to open the account. Again, this creates the opening balance. As far as how much it costs to own a Stable account, there's a $3.25 monthly maintenance fee, and this is billed quarterly. And then there's an asset-based fee on the investment options, and that is between 0.19 and 0.33% and applies only to the earnings portion of the investments. The maximum contribution amount into an ABLE account from any source is $15,000 per calendar year. If the beneficiary is employed, then he or she may contribute an additional $12,760 of their employment earnings. For the individual that receives SSI, it's important that they know that the Social Security Administration considers ABLE account balances that are over $100,000 as a resource. So once the account reaches $100,000, anything in excess of that, they start counting towards that $2,000 asset limit. New as of 2019, there is a state tax deduction for all contributions made into the WVABLE account by the West Virginia resident and taxpayer, and that's dollar for dollar. And then also effective 2019, when the account beneficiary passes, West Virginia Medicaid will not file a claim against the WVABLE account for any medical expenses that were paid out on behalf of the beneficiary. So this was standard internal policy, but now it is state law. West Virginia was one of the first states in the country to pass this legislation in which there cannot be a Medicaid clawback. Now, the only exception is if the expenses were paid for the individual living in a nursing home or a community-based waiver program and over the age of 55. That is as per the West Virginia Estate Recovery Program, and more information about that can be found at wvrecovery.com. So we reviewed quite a bit of information in a short amount of time, but I want to be sure to share our contact information with you as well before handing this over to Tom, where he will take you through the walkthrough of the enrollment. Please note that a copy of the PowerPoint slide will be emailed to all registered attendees so that you can refer to what was been reviewed so far, as well as our contact information here. Please note that the staff at the West Virginia State Treasurer's Office, we do not have access to stable accounts. So once the individual has enrolled and they have a question about their account, they would reach out to Stable Account Customer Service at this email address here. So now I would like to welcome our next presenter, Thomas Hatch. He is with the Ohio Stable Program. Tom is the Accounts Operations Manager for Stable Accounts Program. And Tom, I'm going to turn over the controls to you.
All right, well, thank you, Roxanne, and great to be on with everybody today. And I'm happy to present to you an enrollment walkthrough. We love this program. We're so grateful to be partnered with West Virginia. And, you know, this is a passion of ours. And so anytime we can help individuals understand better what it is that we do and how we do it and why we do it, it's our pleasure to do so. Wanted to start in a place that Roxanne already introduced, and that was at the WVABLE.com website. You'll notice on this website, if you hadn't previously, that there are some open the account buttons here. There's actually one here at the top and one over here at the side. And these will be your primary links to get to the page that you'll need in order to open an account. I've highlighted these in red, and you'll also notice too, this will become relevant later, that we have login buttons also at the top and down here to the side, and I'll reference those later as something additional that you'll need to know. But you start again at WVABLE.com. When you hit the open an account button, you will be taken to our next page. As Roxanne mentioned, because West Virginia has partnered with Ohio and with Stable Account, just so that you're not confused, everything on these screens will be titled Stable Account with our logo and name, but be assured that you are in the correct location and that you have reached the correct site, and this is the site that you would enroll in for a WVABLE account. This opening screen, all there really is to do is to put in an email address here. This would be an address to which you want email communications to come. And then we also have a couple check boxes here for disclosures that are required, also with links to them if you wanted to go out and actually see them. The first one is for our plan disclosure statement. That is actually about an 80-page document, so not light reading, but goes over all the rules and policies for the plan. Would be good to have a copy. The other one is Someday, who is our program administrator. Someday is a wholly owned subsidiary of Bank of New York Mellon, and they are the ones that actually offer this enrollment site and the account site that we work with. So this site that we're seeing and that you'll enroll through actually is hosted by Someday, and they collect all the data and they do everything on their site, on their side. Site terms of use and policies and things are here if you want to look at them. Once you're done, go ahead and click on the Get Started. That button will be grayed out until both of these boxes are checked. Once they're checked and an email address is there, you can go ahead on to the next part of the enrollment. Our enrollment today will be looking at primarily a walkthrough of an authorized legal representative, somebody who would like to open an account and manage it on behalf of the beneficiary with a disability. But I will explain some differences. So first of all, the first question that you'll be asked in the process is, are you the beneficiary? Right up here at the top. And if you answered yes to this, so if you are an individual that is managing this for themselves, then you would click yes. Upon clicking yes, it would ask you for an additional question, or it's actually a checkbox if you want to self-identify as a veteran. It's not a required checkbox in order to click on next, but you could check that if it was applicable. Otherwise, you'd click and you would go to a separate screen where you would put in the beneficiary information. On this particular case, we are not the beneficiary. We're going to be enrolling as an authorized legal representative. So we would select no, which opens up the screen that you see below the answer, which we start filling in the beneficiary information. So I've given some examples here. I put in John Doe. It requires a social security number, date of birth. You can select how you want to be identified, he, she, so forth. You'd also put in a residential address. Do know that for the residential address, no PO boxes or military addresses are accepted. This needs to be an actual address where if things needed to be sent, it would go to a residential address. I filled one in here just for our example's sake. I don't know how many of you recognize this, but it's actually the address of your state capitol building, I believe, or that building there. And then also I wanted to point out this additional box over to the side. Some of the slides you'll see through our walkthrough will not always show this, but I wanted to point this out. Currently it is grayed out and it says leave a message and shows a little email icon. This is our live chat feature that we have through the walkthrough. If you enroll during off hours of customer service, this box will be grayed as you see it saying leave a message. If you click on it, you can send them an email message with questions. If it's during customer service hours, this question will not be grayed out and it will allow you to do a live chat with a customer service representative with questions you might have about the process in which you're going through. A really nice feature that we added when we moved to Someday as our program administrator. Once you've filled out all the applicable information about the beneficiary, again, the individual whose account this will be, the individual with the disability, you go ahead and click the next button at the bottom, and it will take you to our next screen. The next screen then asks to tell about yourself being the authorized legal representative. So similar type of information, you'll have your first and last name, a social security number, date of birth, phone number. You can put an alternate phone number in if you would like to, but it's optional. How you want to be identified, he, she, so forth. If the residential address is the same, which I did for this particular example, you can actually just check this box which says, I live with John Doe in this particular case. This is Mama Doe that's signing up here. So you could click that box and it would pre-populate the exact same address information as the beneficiary. If that's not the case, then you could put in separate residential address information for yourself. There's one more question that's asked before we go to the next screen. Some people are interested into why we ask this, and I will explain briefly. But it asks if you are employed, or what your work status is. And there's, I believe, 3 options. It's yes, no, or I am employed, I'm not employed, or so forth. If you are employed, it actually asks you to identify the kind of work that you do. It's a drop-down menu with a variety of different categories, generalized categories. There's even an other on there if none of the categories fit. Some people wonder why is it that we ask this question? So I thought I would briefly explain. Because we are using Someday, which is again, Bank of New York Mellon supported group, banking regulations are a little bit tighter than others. And this relates back, frankly, to the Patriot Act or anti-money laundering regulations. And they found that if individuals that are employed identify themselves in certain types of industries, that may present a little bit more of a risk than others. So this is just simply something that they require us to ask, which goes into their identity verification process to see if this could lead them in a different direction as to, is this going to be a legitimate person or not, or could there be some concerns? Once you fill that out, you go ahead and click on the next button at the bottom, which will take us to the following screen. This screen, in order to see it better, I've kind of cut it in half because if I try to include it just all together, it shrinks it down and the viewability is not that good. So on the left is the first half of the screen, and this goes over eligibility. So Roxanne explained this during her part of the presentation, that there are certain categories that need to be met in order to be eligible. This one asks about your entitlement to either SSI, which for this example is what I chose. The second option is eligibility for SSDI. And the final one is the self-certification. So if you're going to be using a doctor's certification, you'd click the third button. I also want to point out down here that there is a link here to a form that can be downloaded and used. That form you can have a doctor use to sign and have as evidence that this disability was approved and was diagnosed by this doctor. That is something that we do not require you to submit to us, but you would be asked to keep that on hand in case there were ever any questions about it. So you'll need to select one of those particular 3 categories. Then we ask for the diagnosis code. So the diagnosis code it's pretty standard in the industry, I believe, but it will be a drop-down menu. I chose for this example code 1, which is developmental disorders, but there's things on the list such as intellectual disability, psychiatric disorder, nervous disorder, congenital anomaly, respiratory disorder, and then I think there's an other category. So we just ask for that. It actually helps us in statistical tracking to understand what types of disabilities individuals in the industry have that are signing up for these accounts. And it's something that actually the Social Security Administration also asks for because we send reports to them monthly. Following question, and this would be scrolling down the same page, but I split it up here. Is the disability permanent? In this case, I selected yes. I'll explain one thing that happens when you select yes, but if you selected no, then there's also some further questions about what happens if that disability is not permanent. I selected yes, which actually opens up this final checkbox down here, and when we get there, I'll talk about that. What is the relationship to this beneficiary? This is something, again, that Roxanne had highlighted in her part of the presentation. Currently, there are only 3 options in this drop-down menu. There's parent legal guardian, conservator, or power of attorney. But as Roxanne highlighted, coming very soon, we anticipate by the end of this calendar year, most likely some point in December, to this drop-down menu will be added spouse, sibling, grandparent, and Social Security representative payee. So that functionality is not there yet, but we anticipate that being on this list and available to choose by the end of this year, most likely some point in December. But as Roxanne had mentioned, keep your eyes on WVABLE websites, and they'll have updates for you when that happens. Once all that information has been input, the last one is these certifications down here, which must be checked in order to have the next box highlighted to continue. The first, you're certifying that the disability or blindness developed before the age of 26. Again, a comment that Roxanne had highlighted in her presentation, that the beneficiary has no other ABLE accounts, and if they've rolled over an account, that they've met requirements there. And then the following one, and this one would not be available if you selected no, but if you selected yes, I believe this opens up as an option that you expect the disability to last at least for the rest of the person's life. I have no reason to expect, anything to change. And that happens because I selected yes as permanent. But if it's a permanent disability, they will, be eligible forever, no problem. But you're just certifying that that is the understanding in the case. Once you've filled out the eligibility information, you'll click on next, and that will take you over to the following screen. So this one is something that's newer to us. Again, something brought in with Someday when they became our program administrator. This is, it's called in the industry KBA, which stands for Knowledge-Based Authentication. Some of you may have gone through this before. Essentially, it searches publicly for certain pieces of information about you, in this case, the authorized legal representative, and presents you questions that you should only be the one able to answer. Things such as, what is a former address that you've lived at? And it might list 3 or 4 addresses. One of them is bound to be correct, and the others were just fictitiously made up, and you select the correct answer. There's a total of 5 questions, and I will tell you by way of information that I believe you only have to answer 2 or 3, I'm trying to remember, of the questions correctly to be able to pass. You don't actually have to answer all 5, but this is just a way to try to identify you during this process so that we're comfortable with who you are and so forth. So get through those knowledge-based authentication questions. If you fail the questions, if you don't get enough correct answers right, it will let you through a second time with a new set of questions. And if you fail a second time, then it's actually going to lock up the system and make you take some steps away from the enrollment process. So just be aware of that. But once you've answered those questions and you've passed, you'll go ahead and click next, which will take you to this screen, which asks for communication preferences. So on your communication preferences, you can select that you want everything emailed to you. That would be quarterly statements and tax forms. And let me specify, the actual statement will not be mailed to you, but a link informing you that the statements are available and a link to the site will be emailed to you. You would actually log into the account and be able to retrieve the statements and tax forms from the site. So they're not going to be attached to the email. They will just let you know that they're available electronically. You also have an option to receive quarterly statements electronically, but receive the tax forms in the mail. That's fine. The final option is to receive both via mail. I will let you know, though, that with the last option, if both tax forms and quarterly statements are mailed to you, there is a $10, as defined here, $10 per account charge on this. This is an annual account, so annually your account would be charged $10 for that service. So obviously we recommend, one of the first 2 options. There's no cost to those, and they're by and large the options that people select. This next one is just kind of a marketing thing. Do you want to get email updates about plan changes or things? If you're like me, I'd probably leave that unchecked. And then mailing address. So the mailing address can be the same or can be different from the residential address. And this can include PO boxes, and military addresses. So this is where you want all the information mailed to if you selected the send me mail option. So put in whatever address that you want there, and that's where things would be mailed to. Once that's all filled in, and I didn't fill it in on this example, so you can see an example of the grade box here. It won't let me pass because I didn't fill it in on this example, but once I fill that in, this next box would be blue, and then I could go on to the next screen. The next screen is up your login. The system that we use now is that the email address that you put here is your username for most account purposes, and then you'll create a password. This email address can be the same as the email address you put in at the beginning of the process, or it could be different. I suppose most people will use the same. So you'll populate your email address and then create a password. Strong passwords are recommended, which means in general senses, you want at least 3 of 4 measures. You want a lowercase letter, a capital case letter, a number, and some type of symbol. Probably at least 3 of those 4. And then also they judge the length of the password too, to create a strong password. If you don't have enough of those types of conditions, then it may reject the password, but most of the time, most of them pass by with no problem. So once you've created your login credentials and click the next button, you will go to a review screen. I haven't shown the whole entire screen here because again, it gets long and it would be compressed on the slide. But just know that you at this point can review through everything that you have inputted to this point in the application. We also have these little like pen or pencil symbols. And if there's something in that section that you want to change, you just simply click on that icon and it will take you back into that section of the enrollment process to change that item. So this is a good one to review over, make sure all information is correct. If it is, then at the bottom, which I don't show, you'll have another next button. And the next button will take you to the final step. And that is once you've completed that, there will be an email sent to the email address that you specified, wanting you to verify and confirm your email address. So the slide here in the back, this is what will show on the screen. This is actually a version of what the email looks like. So the email will come from someday, no reply at someday.com. It will have a box in it. You can click on a button to verify, and that's the way that you can verify your email address. Once you've clicked on that box to verify, then you will see on your enrollment screen, the lovely green screen, your email pals now, your email has been verified, you are good to go. Now at this point, the enrollment process is complete. Now once the enrollment process is complete though, there's the question of putting your initial contribution into the account. And so I want to specify 2 ways of doing this. And I'm going to take them in a little bit different of an order than we normally would. First would be this. If you would like to fund the account initially with a check, which is acceptable, then what you'll need to do is come out to the WVABLE website. Again, as referenced earlier, at the top, we have the resources tab. On the resources tab, you have a variety of things here. And one of them that I've highlighted, the second in the form section, is called a check contribution form. So this is a form that you would want to go out and get, and you would fill out this form. I'll show you to you in just a second, and include the form with your check when you mail that in to finish out the enrollment process and make your initial contribution. While I'm here, I will also point out that although we didn't discuss this earlier, we do have a paper enrollment form that is found here just above the check contribution form. It is available. We're highlighting here the electronic enrollment process. But if you wanted to go out and look at that form, it is possible to enroll through a paper form. And frankly, all the same questions we asked here are being asked on the paper form as well. So once you download that contribution form, here is what the form looks like. And I'm showing you the first couple pages of that form. And so this is the first page that you'll have of the form. A couple highlights here. Number one, I have put in a red box up here the address to mail the form to. So that would be mentioned by Roxanne to Providence, Rhode Island. There's a PO box there. That is the current address. And then the information that you would need to fill out. You'd have the account beneficiary's name, social security number, and then we also have account number. I wanted to pause here, and part of the reason why I wanted to highlight this form is to let you know that after the enrollment process to this point, the full account number will not be available to you. So if you wanted to use a check to send in to make the initial contribution, go ahead and leave this account number box blank. With the beneficiary's name and social security number, they will be able to identify the account and make sure that that check is deposited appropriately to the proper account. If you ever use this form in the future, once the enrollment process is complete, then you would have access to the full number and you could put that in there as well. The second part of the form, the next page of the form, you'll need to identify whether this contribution is a standard contribution or an able to work. Standard means a contribution from any source, and an able to work specifically is individuals contributing their income to the plan. This would be the individual with a disability, if they're working, contributing income to the plan. So in almost all cases, a standard contribution, especially for enrollment, is going to be what you're going to be selecting. As part of our process, you'll need to identify how you want this initial contribution invested. And so you have all the investment options previously highlighted, your growth and moderate growth, conservative income, or bank safe. You just simply put in the box the dollar amount of the check, as long as all of these combined, if you choose more than one option, equals the dollar amount of the check in the total line, you are good. And then you, again, write the check, print out this form, combine the two of them, mail it to this address. I think it tells you in the instructions, or it does, that you want to make the check out to Stable Account. And again, it's going properly. That's just, the name of our program that we use, and everything comes in that particular name, even though it's West Virginia. And send it in, and that's a way that you can contribute to your account using a check. The next piece I'm going to highlight, though, is if you want to attach a bank account and contribute to the account, that is a continued part of the enrollment flow. So previously, if you want to do a check, you would stop at the point in which you receive the success screen from the email verification. But if you want to attach a bank account, which is also a very common, probably more preferred method if it's available, this is what you would do. So you come out to the login screen. This is what the login screen looks like. Again, I wanted to point this out that in the very beginning of my presentation, I showed you on the WVABLE.com website where you could go to log in. So you'd want to choose that login button off of the WVABLE.com website, and it would take you to this screen. I also wanted to highlight before I go through this that there is an interesting one on the sidebar here, that if you signed up using a paper enrollment form, then this is also where you would come to, after the fact, get a password in order to access that account online. So I wanted to highlight that this is here if you were to choose to use a paper enrollment form. But in this process, you now have your email address that you used for your login, the password that you just set up in the process. You would populate those into these correct boxes and then sign in. Once you've signed in, the very first thing that you're going to see in this example is the dashboard. So you're up here, we call this the dashboard. It's going to show you this account. It's hard to see on this example, but this is kind of a tile. It's like a rectangular tile. that can be clicked on. But here, it even suggests this account is not complete, so we need to click on the button to finish the account setup. And the reason why I did the check contribution first is because if you get to this screen and click on Finish Account Setup, it won't give you the option to contribute by check. This is only the process to attach a bank account. So once a check's been sent in and it's been deposited and everything is fine, when you log in, you won't see this bottom part because your account has been completed and you'll be fine and good to go. But once you click on that Finish Account Setup button, then it takes you through a few more questions. The first question is to set a goal. When we go through the account site, you'll see where this becomes applicable. That's not part of today's presentation, but on the account site, there is a place where you can track a goal. And as many of you might know, oftentimes when people set a goal, they are potentially more successful in achieving that goal. So if you wanted to, it's optional, doesn't have to be done. You could just leave this at 0, but if somebody wanted to add a yearly contribution goal, they could, and then their account site, it will track that for them as they go along throughout the year, and they can see their progress. So in this case, we populated the whole entire enchilada here. We did not only the general contribution limit, but the able to work contribution limit. So combined, if both of those were applicable, 27,760 could be possible. Very lofty goal, but for the example, we put both of those in. You click next after that goal is set, or if you just want to bypass, you click next, and then we come into where you're going to add a bank account. I'll point out here, it's a little bit lighter than I would have liked it, but there are going to be 2 options for setting up a bank account. You can do it, I'll say more streamlined and easier, or you can do it manually. So this one that we're highlighting here is what I'll say is the easier route. So Plaid, which is identified up here, is a vendor that our program manager uses to electronically link a bank account to your WVABLE account or stable account. So what happens when you select this option, Plaid, which is a vendor that has relationships with over 8,000 different banks nationally, will give you a list to select from of what banking institution you bank at. I don't know what the most common ones are in West Virginia, but definitely something like a Huntington Bank is going to be there, a Fifth Third Bank will be there, Chase Bank, which is shown here, any of your larger banks. Now, unfortunately, if you are with a local credit union or a small community bank, there could be a chance that it may not be on the list and you'll have to use the manual process. But if you can, this is very easy. You select the bank. It actually, through a secure link, brings up the login credentials for your bank. You put in your username and password of the bank. So like you're logging into your online banking account, and it will bring up a screen similar to this, where it will actually show my checking, my savings, whatever accounts that you have that can be attached. You just simply select which account that it is that you want to attach, a checking account, a savings account, hit continue, and voila, this does all the work for you in attaching that bank account and making it immediately available to move money electronically between that account and your stable account. If the bank does not exist on the list, or if you would prefer to not use this process, we have a manual process, which looks like this. You would click on, manually connect to the bank account here, and then this just has you input all the information manually. So you would put in the account holder's name. So if this was your account, you'd put your name there. The account type, either checking or savings, the routing number, and the account number. If you have any questions about where these are located, we have these little, you'll see this little like eye icon in a circle right by my pointer. You click on that and it will give you examples and descriptions on where to find those numbers, like on a check or a deposit receipt. But you put in the routing number, account number, and then you can also nickname the account so that when you log into your stable account, when you go to deposit or withdrawal, this bank account will show up however you've titled it. So it could be Mama Doe's checking or Huntington checking, or whatever description you want to add, but that will be the description that will show up in the account when you go to use that for transaction purposes. Once all of that is filled out, you can click on next, and that will take you to the ability to then specify your initial contribution. Even at this point, you've just added the bank account, which will be available instantaneously and automatically. So how do we want to fund this? Again, you have all of the investment options. You put into each of the boxes how much that you want to put into each one. The total initial contribution needs to be at least $25, but is not restricted to that. You can put in as much as you want to the first time. And then once that's in and you collect next, then behind the scenes, they are putting that transaction out there to start in process, to either pull the money from the bank, or obviously if you send in a check, they'll wait for the check to deposit. But in this particular walkthrough, they would send out that notice to the bank, already having a transaction in process to pull the money from the bank in the dollar amount specified to be invested in whichever option you chose. And finally, the final part of this part of it, which is an optional part, but for those that would like to automate their savings, you can set up recurring contributions. These contributions, the only interval that we currently offer is monthly, but you can select what day of the month that you want the contribution to come out. You can select what investment option you want that contribution to go into. And we've already pre-populated, but you'll select the amount that you want that contribution to be. So if you wanted to do that, you could populate all of that information. If you don't, just simply click review at the bottom and you'll bypass the screen, no problem. But if you want to do that, you can. Also, the previously mentioned check contribution form can also be used to set up recurring contributions through a form that we have. And then from there, once you set that up, you'll get to a review screen again, similar to the last review screen that we described. Anytime you want to change anything, just click on one of these pen or pencil icons and you can go in and edit. But if everything looks good on the review screen, you go ahead and click on Finish Account Setup, and you'll get your green success screen again. So this is you're all set. You can go ahead and explore your account. And if you want to click on Take a Look here, it will actually take you into the account site. The account site will be covering in detail on the next webinar series that we do. But this is really what there is to enrolling. It's not time consuming. It's not super difficult. You have resources there, kind of like here, of leaving a message or live chatting should you need that. Customer service is available to help you through the enrollment process, so shouldn't be a problem at all. Now, I will mention one more final thing before I conclude and open it up for questions, and that is, once you've opened your first account, what if you're in a position to want to open an additional account, but you want to manage them under the existing login that you created? So I wanted to show you that real quick. So once you have created the first account, and I have one here under the title of Mitchell, so this is again the dashboard. You've logged in with your email address and the password you set up, and you're into this dashboard. On the dashboard, it's populated with my name here because I use this as an example, but whatever name you put in under the registration, it will have your first name here. This is a drop-down button, which I highlight down here. And when you click on the drop-down from this dashboard, it will give you 4 options: profile, add account, help, and then sign out. So at this point, if you add an account, click on that particular button, it will take you through a much shorter enrollment process, because the shorter process is just simply filling out the information for the additional beneficiary. You don't need to go through setting up, your username and password and some of those other screens. It already knows that you're the authorized legal representative, so you skip by that screen. So you just simply fill in the beneficiary's information, their eligibility information, a communication preference, and then you're done. And then what happens is when that account is added, then on this dashboard where you see this first account here for Mitchell, you'll see an exact tile, rectangular tile just like that now down underneath for the new account. So when you log in and you get to this dashboard, you'll see the 1, you can see 2, you can see 3, however many that you have set up under this login, you'll see them all on this dashboard. And then you can click on whichever one you want, which will take you into the overview page of that particular account. And again, the overview page will be on our next webinar. So we all recommend that you come to that one so you can see more in depth about how the account is used. But wanted to finish there and turn some time back over to Roxanne for any particular questions that anybody might have.
Thanks, Tom. That was very informative and very detailed, and you did it in the time frame that we were allotting for today. So do we have any questions from anyone about the enrollment? And Tom, if not, I would like to go ahead and just ask a couple questions that I had thought of. You had mentioned that you have 2 ways in order to contribute, by mailing in a check with a contribution form, and then also through the EFT transfer. Can you tell us the time frame to allow for, if you're going to mail in a check, how long that takes to process and actually show up, as a balance in the account, and then the turnaround time for the EFT transfer?
Great question, Roxanne. I'll start with the EFT question because it's easier. Because once the bank account has been contacted and that transaction is put in place, you're looking at 2 to 4 business days for that to be completed. I will tell you that if you use the manual route and there happens to be something miskeyed in the information, then it may take longer, because if the account's not found properly, because maybe you incorrectly input the routing number or the account number, then there may take some time to get that straightened out. But if everything is correct, you're talking 2 to 4 business days for the electronic funds to be in the account. The check contribution is a little bit more difficult to identify because, frankly, it depends on the United States Postal Service and how quickly they can do the mail to the location that it's going. But once it gets to the location, they process those as they come in and make them available immediately. There's another discussion to be had about hold times. That may be a discussion for another day. But do also understand that when contributions come into the account, not only once they're available or present, there is a number of days hold time on them before they can actually be withdrawn and used. And so that's something to understand that exists as well. But for a check, assuming that it can get there within a week's time, it shouldn't take much longer than a week to be received and put in the account, depending on the mail system and how quickly they can get it there.
Okay. Thanks, Tom. That's a question that I sometimes get. I want to make sure that we included that. So in the short, if you are opening an account and you want to make sure that you have money, you're trying to eliminate the concern of being over the $2,000 asset limit, and it's like towards the end of the month. In other words, keep that into consideration when you're enrolling and when you're wanting to, make that contribution into the account and get it out of your checking or savings account. That the EFT, would be the quickest way to get that processed. We have some other questions in the chat box. Let's see. Can family and friends contribute directly to a WVABLE stable account?
I know Roxanne knows the answer, but I guess I'll answer this one. Absolutely. Okay. Contributions can come from anywhere and anyone, obviously from legal sources, but yes, that is true. And actually, another reason why I would recommend you come back for our next webinar, when we show the overview page and how to function in the account, we'll show you the gifting feature that we have there. We actually set up their own gifting website and have people contribute through that, which is a great benefit.
Yeah, we have lots of folks that talk about the e-gift option. It's underutilized, I think, because folks don't necessarily understand how that works, but it's a great way for individuals to make a direct contribution where the monies don't actually land in the hands of the beneficiary. It just goes straight from the individual that's providing the gift into the stable account. Are student loans one of the qualified expenses?
All right, I think Roxanne's probably going to rely on me for all the answers today, but yeah, so here's what I'd say about student loans. Education is absolutely a qualified expense. I would just put the small caveat that was the education expenses for the individual with the disability. And if they were, then I would suggest that student loans were used to pay for that educational expense, and that yes, funds from the WVABLE or stable account could be used to pay those student loans that were used to pay for that beneficiary's education.
Thanks, Tom. And another question, let's see. I don't think I see any new questions, but one question I did have, Tom, that you had mentioned. So during my portion of the brief overview, I had included that, per the IRS final regs, in which they have expanded who can enroll and establish accounts and manage accounts to include the grandparent, the spouse, sibling, and a Social Security representative payee. So that soon in West Virginia, those individuals will have the authority to do so. And then you had included that the online enrollment platform will have those included in the drop-down menu come December. So I wanted to be sure that folks understood that those are two separate things, that West Virginia law is being updated to include those additional folks that can establish and manage accounts. We are actually waiting for the governor's signature on the legislation that was recently passed in the special session in October. And once he signs, that will be in effect upon passage. Then separate, when folks actually go to enroll, they're not going to see those categories yet in the drop, but they will see it in December. But technically speaking, by law, they do have the authority to establish and manage accounts once we get the governor's signature on that legislation. So Tom, can you just briefly, tell folks how it is if we have, for example, a Social Security representative payee that wants to establish an account under this new hierarchy, yet it's not yet included in the drop down. How is it that they can go ahead and establish an account within the enrollment platform? What are your recommendations?
Yeah, thanks, Roxanne. First of all, I'd recommend to do whatever you feel the most comfortable with. If you think you should wait until you can accurately identify that in the dropdown, totally understood, and that's no problem whatsoever. One thing that we will tell people, though, is that because this is actual law, even if the system does not show the functionality yet, my recommendation would be just to select from the options that you're given what you feel is closest to the most appropriate to what you're actually doing. Obviously, having documentation on hand of your capacity and your authority to do this, and then knowing that legally you're still okay because the law says that you're okay. And then I would just select whatever option in the available options you feel most comfortable selecting. And then one of the things that we will be doing post getting this available online is going back to some of those situations and trying to adjust them on the backside and select the appropriate category for what the person is actually doing to make sure that all the records line up. But if you really have a need to open an account now and fund it to try to get under those asset limits or so forth, then I would suggest just choose what you feel is most appropriate, knowing that you have the documentation on hand to support, even though you can't select the option online, to support that you are legally authorized to do so. And again, we're probably looking a little over a month out, keeping my fingers crossed that this will be available. So not too much longer, and we'll have it there.
Thanks, Tom, for clarifying that. And then we have a couple more questions. One, again, is they're asking, as a representative payee, how do you answer the verifying questions?
Yeah, so most of the verifying questions I think are pretty self-explanatory, right? So if they're the eligibility verifying questions, you should know the answers to those. When it comes to the question of, your authority or your capacity, again, we will have that available, but for now, you just check the boxes that you're asked, and if you feel that you can verify the information that they're asking, then you should be okay to proceed.
Okay, and then we have another question. Do I have to tell SI how much money I have in my account every time I spend it?
Yeah, really good question. Actually, interestingly enough, we've kind of talked a little bit about this, but the Internal Revenue Service is the federal agency that's actually been put in charge to oversee these accounts, not the Social Security Administration. So the Social Security Administration does have reports that are sent to them from our program administrator directly to them monthly. So they are receiving some data around these accounts. The short answer is no. Anytime you spend funds out of these accounts, you do not need to report anything to the Social Security Administration. It is good to keep records on hand of how you're spending those and make sure that they're qualified expenses. But no, none of that needs to be reported. The only thing that I'll add is, although I don't work in this space directly, sometimes if you're going to renew benefits, they may ask for an account statement of your stable account or WVABLE account just to verify that it's there. But of course, nothing on the account statement will be relevant to them because it's all a protected resource.
Yeah, and I know that just from talking to folks, it's not necessarily uncommon that Social Security or even DHHR may request to see a statement. And again, they're not going to, the balances that are in there are disregarded from Social Security and Medicaid, but I know that there's been times when they have requested a statement. And so just so folks know that that's not necessarily uncommon. And then we have another question, again, along the lines for when a rep payee establishes an account. They're asking how, or I would not know all of the address the beneficiary has lived.
Yeah, and that's probably when you get back to the knowledge-based authentication. Do understand that particular question is about the authorized legal representative. It's not about the beneficiary. So if you actually if you were to sign up as a self-administering beneficiary, then yes, those questions would be asked about the beneficiary. But if you're enrolling as an authorized legal representative and you put information in those screens, then it's actually going to be drawing upon your information, not on theirs. So you'd be actually answering questions about yourself, and hopefully you'd know those answers rather than answers about the beneficiary.
Okay, those are all great questions, and I want to make sure that I'm not overlooking any. Okay, I don't see any more questions. And but thanks, Tom, for this overview, the enrollment walkthrough. I think it's incredibly helpful for myself watching it. It's helped to clarify some things, some questions that I've had. So if we don't have any more questions, I'd like to go ahead and end the webinar for today. And again, I want to thank Disability Rights of West Virginia and the West Virginia Developmental Disabilities Council for hosting today's webinar and also the series. I want to thank Roy Mallory for providing the tech support for us. And again, Tom, for sharing all of your expertise. Tom is wonderful. He helps to answer a lot of questions on behalf or for what WVABLE. I reach out to him a lot, and he is my contact when we have some maybe extenuating circumstances that kind of, with Stable, he's great to help facilitate those. So again, thanks so much, Tom. We thank everyone for attending today's webinar. We hope to see you for our next workshop in the series, how to use your Stable account. Tom and myself will be back as your presenters for the workshop. It's scheduled for Friday, November the 5th at 1 p.m. If you haven't already done so, Feel free to email wvable@wvsto.com to register, and you will be sent a link to join. The workshop will include a walkthrough of the online dashboard. Attendees will learn how to make contributions and withdrawals, how to add a bank account for making electronic transfers, and additional features and tips will be shared that help to make using the online account easy. So attendees will also have the opportunity to ask questions at the end. So it's been a pleasure to have you all with us today. And thank you so much for joining us, and hope everyone has a safe rest of your day and weekend ahead. Thank you.